right. Welcome back for another episode. And we've got a good one planned for you guys today. With summer coming, I think this is a really appropriate topic. And so I'm going to let Adrienne kick us off.
Hi. Today we're gonna jump into vitamin D and sun exposure and just kind of talk about how vitamin D affects our body, the importance of it, and how to get it. I feel like one, we're heading into summer, so sun exposure is something sometimes we're scared of, right? And in moderation is good, but also it's a supplement that I heavily recommend to most of my patients and things as well. And the biggest thing is actually 40 to 60% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. So it's really something that we should be looking at in most of our patients, and even just in our life. And it's a really easy thing to change and enhance our health with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important, right? When you hear that, that's staggering. Like more than half of our population is deficient in vitamin D. And to add to that, I think those numbers are more based on traditional labs, right? So when we get
Yeah.
into labs, we'll talk a little bit more about optimal. So I would say, like you, most of my clients are deficient in vitamin D. And what are some of the things that you think contribute to that?
Yeah. So one, we're spending a lot of time indoors, right?
Mhm.
We're working jobs or our kids are in school. And so a lot of our day is spent inside, especially in winter months or in Florida in summer months. Sometimes we're just trying to get away from the sun.
Yeah.
Um, Sunscreen, that's a whole different controversial topic, right? But sunscreen, we've been putting on daily sunscreen. And so sometimes when we're only spending 5, 10 minutes outside and we have sunscreen on, it's limiting our vitamin D absorption.
Correct.
We also can look at seasonal and geographical limitations, and even our skin tone affects how we absorb sunlight.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. And, I think like you just mentioned this, but this is such a huge one. And like I said, we're not going to dive into sunscreen today, but it is a controversial topic. So if you ever want to jump down a rabbit hole, that's a good one to think about. But for so many of us, right, for so many years, we've been worried about, skin damage, right? Whether we're talking about cancer prevention or wrinkle prevention, every single product we put on our face that's commercially available has sunscreen in it. And so you're limiting so much of that exposure in the products you have. So thinking about what we put on our skin is super important.
Right. And again, like if we're putting on SPF and we're staying indoors all day, right? That little bit we do get, it's
Right.
limiting that access. So
Sure,
it's a good
absolutely.
point that it's in so much.
Yeah. And what about our women specifically? Because most of our
Yes.
listeners are women. What do you see in that?
Well, so it's really interesting, right? And women, because we're so different and our hormones are fluctuating and we go through so many different seasons of life, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause. We also have a higher fat content than men, which affects our vitamin D absorption as well.
Mhm.
So really we see higher or vitamin D deficiency in women overall.
Yeah.
And so we talk about our hormones and stuff as well and how it absorbs, but it also when we're deficient in vitamin D, it's going to affect all those processes as well. Another factor is autoimmunity is higher in women, and and vitamin D deficiency heavily leads to autoimmunity as well. So
Yeah. So not only an important factor for day-to-day life, but also in prevention of more chronic conditions long term, which we see a lot of in the women we work with. Okay, so I think this is interesting because a lot of people don't realize that vitamin D is actually really functions as a hormone, right? We all think of it as
yeah.
a vitamin, but when we look at how it works in our body, it really acts more in a hormone-based role. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so vitamin D, hmm, I actually don't know where I'm going with that.
It's all
Sorry. That was
good. Yeah,
my bad.
so vitamin D, no, you're good. So I'll just take that part out.
Yeah.
So vitamin D in our body, a lot of people don't realize, really acts more as a hormone than it does as a vitamin, right? We think of it as a vitamin supplementation, but it really serves as more of a hormonal role. And so in that role, it plays an impact in things like bone health in our body, in our regulation of our hormones, in our metabolic health and insulin sensitivity, muscle function, immune regulation. Like there's so many components, and it's really part of that communication system, not just another vitamin, if you will, right?
Yeah, and actually, something really interesting when we specifically look at bone health and calcium absorption, women are more prone to osteoporosis.
Right.
And I believe so when we have our vitamin D stores, our we are storing the most of our vitamin D up until the age of 35 and a little bit beyond too. But having optimal vitamin D levels before the age of 45 really is a strong indicator for preventing osteoporosis down the line. So when we're
Yeah,
looking at young women or even just women in general, right? We want to make sure our vitamin D is optimal because it's going to impact that bone health later in life.
for
And I'm
sure.
sure as a PT, osteoporosis is just so
Right.
hard.
Well, and I think, from a functional standpoint, right? So I've dealt with this in my own family. We have a strong family history of bone density issues. But,
Mm.
and then, as a PT and then in my role in functional health, I mean, I've switched, right? Like my own personal journey is now more about being able to maintain my bone density because not only does that affect me being able to, maintain an independent life and get off the toilet, right? Like when I'm older, all of those things. But also, we know that fractures are one of the biggest things that are going to lead to demise and decline and ultimately
Yeah.
death, right? And while we can't avoid that at some level, I certainly want to live healthy and optimally until I reach that point. And so I think I'm a huge proponent of looking at that. And I think so many people don't realize it starts all the way back in your 20s and 30s, right? Not when you actually start to hit some of those things postmenopausal, where that bone depletion is going to be greater.
Well, and I think it goes back to what you say is like one of the things we do in functional health and functional medicine is looking at optimal, right? What's optimal for your body. And so many of us are living in suboptimal ranges that will impact us later in life. So not only are we not able to do what we want right now, but we really won't be able to do the things we want to when we're older. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously we want to start younger, but not only is this important for bone health as we age, but also for hormonal issues that affect younger
yeah.
women. So what else do you see in your practice in terms of vitamin D and other hormonal issues in younger women?
Yeah. So vitamin D deficiency actually is associated with conditions such as PCOS, and can exacerbate PMS symptoms and mood. And so a lot of these cycle-related problems, like as you had said previously, it kind of acts as a hormone. When we see deficiency there, we're seeing imbalances. So these conditions related to our fertility and women's health and hormones
Yeah.
that are primarily caused by imbalances in our body is vitamin D deficiency often affects. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, today we're seeing, for so many reasons, we're seeing an increase in these conditions. But when we're looking at simple fixes and simple deficiencies to address, vitamin D is a great one to look at initially because it is something so many people are deficient in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and when we talk about root cause approach, right? Like maybe vitamin D deficiency isn't the sole piece of the story, but it certainly can make a significant improvement in symptoms. And then when we start talking about some of these things that can happen downstream, it is a sole source of
Right.
the problem, right? So it's so important on both fronts. Okay. So I think we've driven home kind of the importance of vitamin D for our hormones, for our quality of life, for our bones, right? But what does that look like? So if everybody's thinking, okay, well, I'm supposed to be afraid of the sun, I'm not supposed to spend too much time in it, but how do I get enough sun? What are those other sources? What do you usually recommend as a starting point?
Yeah. So again, the best source of vitamin D is primarily through sunlight. And so when we're looking at it, and again, you want to look at efficiency, right? We're working, we're busy, we're doing things. The best time of day to go get sunlight is from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's when we have our highest UV index. And really all you want is 10 to 30 minutes of direct sunlight. It depends on your skin tone. It does make a difference. Those with lighter skin tones don't need to be in the sun as long as someone with a darker skin tone. And actually, the darker your skin tone is, the more sunlight you need for absorption at that point, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other thing is that's big is sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm sitting in my office, I'm getting sunlight. No, you need to be in direct sunlight, not through glass, not through a shade. So really you want 10 to 30 minutes. The middle of the day is optimal. Um, However, when I say that, there's other benefits to sunlight as well. And so I personally sometimes don't get out in the middle of the day, especially in Florida. It's a little bit toasty and I have to go back to work. But if you go out in the morning and start working on your circadian rhythm, right? So maybe I'll spend a little bit longer outside in the morning, work on my circadian rhythm and get that sunlight early. And then, yeah. And then that's how I do it. But um, again, I've said this twice already. The best time to go out is 10 to 2 p.m.
Sure. Yeah, and so I'm with you, right? Like living in Florida, 10 to 2 can be absolutely miserable certain times of the year in particular. When it comes to circadian rhythms, I'm almost always recommending our clients get out before 10 a.m. to get that sunlight to help really set them up for a good night's sleep the next night. And so, mid-morning is a great time, right? If you can swing it to go out for a 10-minute walk. It doesn't have to be long, like we talked about. Take the dogs for a walk around the block, stretch your legs, pick some weeds, whatever it is. A little bit of sunlight on your skin goes a long way.
Yeah.
What about those who either aren't getting enough from that, or maybe, I'm one of these people, right? Genetically, I don't make a lot of vitamin D. What are some other things that we can do to really support our bodies in that?
Yeah, so supplementation, right? I know you and I are big food first, natural first approach, but I really truly believe that vitamin D is one of those supplements that can be very beneficial for clients, right?
Mhm.
And so like you said, like it could be limited sun exposure. So either beefing up your vitamin D in the winter, or hey, you've done some testing and you've looked and you're just a little bit lower.
Yeah.
Also, right now I'm actually taking more vitamin D because I'm breastfeeding with lowered nutrients. So kind of considering your season of life. But
Yeah.
when you look at vitamin D supplementation, we're looking at D3 is
Yes.
kind of the preferred form, and you're looking at 1,000 to 4,000 IU daily. Again, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, they're a little bit different. So hold off on those numbers. But and you ideally want to take it with fat for absorption, a fatty food. So an avocado. I like to take it with my breakfast, my body processes it a little better. And you could even consider taking it with K2 for absorption as well. So you'll
Yeah.
see sometimes supplements say vitamin D with K2. Um, that's personally what I do.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm a big fan of making sure that you have the K2 with it for absorption, for blood flow, and the cardiac benefits of it as well. I think that's huge, and just optimizing the use. And then you hit on the other big one is making sure you're having fatty foods with it. Both are fat based, right? So vitamin D is a fat based vitamin. So having fat with it is what's going to help it get out of your stomach and into your bloodstream and actually make it effective. I would say sometimes I even go a little bit higher on those ranges, but importantly, like before you just start guessing, you want to get testing done. And that's a huge component of this as well. Like a lot of vitamins are water soluble, so you'll pee them out, right? So you'll hear people say it's just really expensive urine if you don't test. And that's true. Vitamin D is not one of those things, though. So you absolutely can take too much of it. And so while I am a proponent of a higher dose than that, I'm also a huge proponent of needing to have labs done in order to look at that. And so I know you have a note in here coming up about labs, but I think since I mentioned
Yeah.
here, making sure that you're looking at the right labs as well, right? So the 25 hydroxy is the lab that you actually want to look at. And the range that most labs will give you is normal would be considered 30 to 100. I would say at 30, most of my clients are still not feeling their best. They're still fatigued, maybe not having, great hormonal regulation and things like that. I would say from a functional standpoint, we're looking more like 70. So I really like my clients to be more in that 60 to 80, 60 to 90 range to know that they're well established and have enough vitamin D on board.
And actually, while you say this, I kind of want to hit on, and like this is a whole tangent for another day, but for
Yeah.
those who haven't worked with a functional medicine provider or kind of dabbled in the functional medicine world, we love labs, right? To get facts and kind of look at where we're going. But that's where what we're looking at is a little different than what your doctor might be looking at, right? So they're going to give you a normal range, but that's not what we had, like as we had said before, like your optimal range for you and we consider other factors in addition. So we're looking at your age, your gender, things like that, lifestyle, and kind of determine what your optimal for functioning would be. Kind of that individualized approach. And so when we talk about labs, a lot of times we find that we are in the normal range when our doctor will pull things, but actually you don't function as well as Jenny said in that normal range. There's actually a more optimal range where you'll see benefits from a nutrient um,
Yeah.
at that level.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take that tangent one step farther because I think this
Okay,
is very
perfect.
important. When we look at normal ranges, right, they're based on what normal people presented with, right?
Mhm.
So they take 10,000 people and they look at their labs and say, oh, this person's healthy. This is that normal range. And so, to give you an example of that, over the last several decades, our normal for testosterone
Yes.
has dropped, right? Because men are not having as much testosterone as they used to. Does that mean it's optimal? Absolutely not. They're just simply looking at it and saying, well, those men are still healthy. And so therefore they're in that range. And I don't know about you, but I think most of our clients and most of you listening don't want to just be normal, right? Normal in today's, day and age is tired, poor memory,
Yeah.
overweight, no energy. Like those aren't the things that you want to be. And so I think when we start talking about optimal and personalized, it's so important and kind of just gives another perspective to why that different look is an important piece.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you to keep preaching because it's just so important. And again, because so many of us get our yearly labs pulled, and
Yeah.
even then, that's like when you see your normal labs, right? And you're on the lower end, you really should consider taking action and working with someone on that. Because if you're on the lower end already, you're
It's
really
just a matter
probably
of
not
time.
feeling your best.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And it's a matter of time before something else goes wrong,
yeah,
right? Where you start to
yeah.
have symptoms, where you start to really fall into that disease process. And we're trying to prevent that. What about food sources? I'll give you my opinion, but I'm curious yours for vitamin D.
Yeah, I think so. I think I don't have a strong opinion here, but I do think food sources, like we are food forward,
Yeah.
is our approach. And so I think while we can supplement with food, it's one of those where we're just kind of not getting enough. However, with that being said, kind of when we were talking about supplementation, one of the big reasons I am a food forward person is because of the cofactors in food that help us process things. And so my big thing is if you are choosing to supplement, that you are taking this with food and fats that have the cofactors that you would naturally find in food to help your body process. I can let you kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so again, food forward first is almost always our approach. The problem for me with vitamin D is the foods that are going to give you that improved vitamin D are going to be things like your fatty fish, right?
Mhm.
So salmon, sardines, right? And so those are all great, but there's a lot of folks that aren't going to have those, whether it's a taste preference. I can't do sardines no matter how hard I
No.
try, just not my jam. I like salmon, but I'm probably not going to eat it enough times a week to get enough support for my body. And then, of course, when we start talking about pregnancy or just fish in general, we worry about things like mercury levels.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a place where, yes, food is great. And yes, include it and include the rainbow and eat all the things. And those are healthy foods in general and in moderation. The likelihood of getting enough to support yourself in supplementation, particularly if you have a low level, is probably just not sufficient.
I totally agree with you on that. And again, like too, we look at our other source of vitamin D, right, is sunlight. And we geographically, right, it just makes such a big difference. Us Floridians are very blessed that we can get out in the sun most
Right.
of the year. But if you're living in a state that's cold and dark, it's really something you should consider.
Yeah. Well, and on that note too, I grew up in the Midwest, right? So that was definitely an
Yeah.
issue for us. But then on top of that, so is getting any sort of like wild caught salmon, right? So
Oh, yes.
farm raised salmon is not going to have your same level of vitamin D in it that, you're going to get from good sun exposure. So I think, while I'm very infrequent to say you need to supplement, this is probably one where, especially if it's a deficiency, you need to supplement.
Yeah, and even looking at my own personal vitamin cabinet, when I pair it with my vitamins, I look at it, vitamin D is the one that is always there, and I think has remained pretty consistent throughout my life,
Sure.
just because it's something that is a need,
Yeah.
even in my personal,
Yeah.
or I feel like I'm suboptimal in vitamin D, even though we live here. So,
Yeah. Well, and I did genetics on myself a few years ago and found out that I was a very poor vitamin D producer. And so, again, like part of the lab values, the data, I know that no matter how much sun I get, no matter how much fresh salmon, wild salmon I eat, I'm probably still going to
yeah.
always have low values. And it was actually my physician who caught it. So I was running the labs simultaneously. They were running my annual labs. And I was like, yeah, sure, throw it in. I don't think it's a problem for me, right? Like I eat all these things. I'm out in the sun. I live in Florida. And I was a 19. And to tell you how much different I felt, and I didn't even know that I was tired, it made such a big difference in my life. So I'm always forever a preacher of checking it and making sure we're optimizing it.
Yeah, that's just such a good story too, again. And when sometimes you think a bigger thing is going on too, and it's really just a nutrient deficiency that you think you're hitting or you and your body's just not processing it
Yeah.
correctly and you need a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. So hopefully you guys have found this helpful to understand a little bit more about vitamin D, particularly as we're getting into the months where you've got the opportunity to have more access to it. Get your labs checked if you haven't. Get out in the sun. Make a routine to make sure you make that happen. And then make sure you're finding somebody who can really look at those labs and make sure you're optimal so that you're feeling your best and preventing any of those long-term problems as well. Anything else you want to add as we end today?
I think that's it.
All right, you guys. Well, until next time, have a wonderful day.
Have a great day.